You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, you know I'm the Mets fan, you're the Yankee fan. Usually we have a Met person on or Yankee person on when we're getting into sports writers here. But today we have the perfect guest with us, someone who has covered both teams in the past. Very rare.
Yeah, it is very rare. He's also covered the Orioles. He's bounced around, done some reporting, a little bit of everything. A lot of places too. He's been in Boston. He's wrote for the Star Ledger. He's wrote for Newsday, and that's a very tongue-in-cheek thing with us because everybody we have on here seems to have gone through Newsday at some point. So we'll have some laughs with him there. He's currently the deputy managing editor for The Athletic. I do not know if he's still nationally writing for them, but he was at one point. We were going to get into the Hall of Fame stuff too, which is always a fun topic. But he's finally on with us. We're really, really excited to have him on. Thanks for coming on. Marc Carig. Marc, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm glad we finally made this work out. I appreciate you guys' patience.
Oh,
Patient with me. So thank you.
no worries. As you know, sometimes it takes a long time to get a good story to fruition here. So very happy to get you on. Marc, absolutely love your background right now. How long did it take you to A, get all those hats, and B, hang them up on the wall?
All right. So there's about 175 of them. And the first one I bought in like 1998. It was the Braves hat right here, my upper right. I've always been a baseball person. Like, I mean, still am. Like, I love baseball. I love the game. Always will. Right. So, you know, uh, the hats were like, I just remember always thinking like, what a cool little piece of the game that is, right? So whenever I went to a new city, I'd find a ball cap. And back in the day, it was like this fun game because you'd go and find some mom and pop sporting goods store and you might get like five of these like old school, brands they don't even make anymore, like basically replica fitted hats, $10 for five.
Nice.
I'm just trying to get rid of him, So like I got a bunch of St. Louis Browns hats up here, and half of them were from sales that I just described. So I grew up in the Bay Area. I'd go in the city in San Francisco. There's a couple places I knew to go to, and I'd get lucky. I'd walk out of there with like $30 a hat, and like 10 of him. So yeah, it's a little different now because a lot more people collect things. There's the internet, and so that also makes it kind of easier to find what you're looking for. Like, and there's a couple hats on here. Like, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a Padres hat that actually is from like the early '80s.
Wow.
Yeah, there are a lot of great hats up there. You see
Expos.
the old Diamondbacks logo before they ruined it and they changed it from the purple and the teal look. I see the Expos hat over there. Let me ask you a question. Has Lids ever contacted you and wanted to form any type of like sponsorship or partnership?
They haven't, but like there's been like hat companies that have like taken note of this and like they'll send stuff, right? Or there was one, it was New Era actually, because they'd seen this thing, like some rep had sent, an email reaching out and stuff like that. The most common question is what Nick just asked, like how do you hang them? And so, like it's funny on Twitter, like if I'm like doing an interview in Zoom, right? Like we're in a presser and I ask a question and people see the background, like every time, if it's like carried on national TV or MLB Network or SNY or Yes, right away it's like, oh my God, how do you hang those up? And I tweet the link every single time. Like it's this one particular brand. They make great racks for these hats. And how long does it take? Like, dang, man, that could be like a 2-hour project. I got a 3-year-old daughter. She thinks it's hilarious to pull them down. I've had practice in having to get them back up. So I think that answered the hat questions, right?
Absolutely. Now you mentioned SNY. I wanted to know, do you ever get sick of putting on SNY and seeing your 5 days in Flushing piece, which is aired at least 5 times a week on SNY?
Yeah, they didn't tell me it was going to be like that, like 5 times a week in Flushing, right? Yeah, and it turns out the predictions on that didn't quite line up.
I know this is going to be a dynasty.
Yeah. But no, you know what? Like it's funny. Those things are so much fun to do, because I think, I don't have to tell you, Nick, right? Like that part of team history was really special to a lot of people.
Right.
And I was working at Newsday at the time, like everybody that appears on this podcast, apparently, right? But Newsday's readership is heavily, 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 Mets, right? Like it was one of the biggest beats at the paper. Got a lot of feedback from people all the time. A lot of them from Long Island. So it actually, for me, it was like cool to not only be covering the team at that point, but also to be doing it for this paper that had such a loyal audience that followed the team. Like that felt good and it felt important. Like it made me feel like when I went to work every day, I was trying really hard to do those readers right? Like be paying attention, be talking to people, keeping an ear out for things. Especially that era, right? Like that, and that particular night you're talking about Wilmer Flores, and that night, like a lot of baseball writing is hard, right? Like every single day, like you're living in constant fear that someone's gonna drop a bomb on you, right? Like someone's gonna break a story and you're gonna look like an idiot. Um, but there are also days where it's like I wouldn't trade him for anything, and that was one of them. That was one of them.
Did covering the Mets and Panic City and Mets Twitter really elevate your social media presence and really make you rely on social media more heavily than you had in the past?
Like yes and no, because honestly, where I feel like the social media aspect really stood out was when I was covering the Yankees for the first time. So I covered the Yankees from like '09 to 2012. Okay. And I was doing that for the Ledger at that point. And, like Joe, right? Like that's a competitive media market. There's a lot of people that cover the Yankees for obvious reasons. There are a lot of interest, a lot of people read the stuff. So I had to figure out a way as someone who wasn't even from here, right? How do I get in here? Like, how do I become somebody that people should read or at least or think that is worth their time, right? Because that's the hardest thing is like, are you worth the reader's time? It's a hard thing to do. So 2009, like not many people, believe it or not, right? This is pre like Twitter being the end all be all.
That
So
was probably a better time in life, though, to be
oh,
honest.
right. It was like, it was like a very Wild West, but it was like a lot less nasty than it is now, right?
Yeah, I see some of the jabs that you get thrown your way very unfairly, I might add. A lot of just silly off the cuff comments that you don't really deserve. But continue.
You know what? Like people can say what they want. I think that's like kind of the strength of it, right? And like, I mean, I choose whether I'm going to, give it any mind or not. You asked the question was like social media and how it's useful. I'll tell you what, one of the ways it's really useful, criticism. I think that's great. If people thought I was being too hard on the teams I covered, I heard about it. And you know what? That's great. So, I taking personal shots, that's no fun, right? Like, calling your name, that's no fun. But when someone's like, you know what, you missed the point in this article, and here's why, and someone tweets that at me, I love it. Like, I mean, I would look forward to that because then I'd just be like, damn, they're right. Ooh, they're right. I messed that up. I missed that. They were right. I should think about that. It made me better, right? So, yeah, like there's a lot of nastiness and it's unfortunate, but that's the world we live in. But there's also a lot of like encouragement. Like I said, like when I really turned into social media, really got into it and leveraged it was the first time with the Yankees, being from a smaller paper, a person who's not from here, didn't know anybody. But by the time I left the beat and got hired at Newsday to cover the Mets, I gained a following, and part of it was because I was accessible on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have these conversations with people. In fact, it's the times that people were critical that I enjoyed the most sometimes because it told me they were paying attention to what you were writing, and if they took the time to point out what they thought was wrong, then I felt like I owed it to him since you put in the time to read it and make this comment, which I might not agree with, but like I respect it. Then I want to respond. And what I found is that having those types of interactions was extraordinarily valuable. And rather than it, like if you're insecure as a reporter, like you can see that as like, oh, they're trying to take me down and all these negative things. But a lot of times, like the way I took it was like, hey, the good thing is they read it.
Right.
That's huge, and you should pay them the respect back. They gave me their time to read it. I'm going to give you my time to respond, especially because you took time to shoot a response to me. I thought so. To me, that was like the healthiest point. But that was that was before the Mets. That was basically how I got in the door in a place like New York, which is no picnic either when you're not from here, especially.
How did you decide in your time, with Star Ledger, Newsday, and The Athletic, when it comes to breaking news, how did you decide whether got to get that out on Twitter right now, got to be first, or let me get it up on my website so the website gets the page clicks?
Man, that's a great question. There isn't a blanket answer, right? Like, I mean, Nick, those things are all like every scenario is a different answer, and
Right.
it just kind of depends, right? So, like, if it's okay, I'll just use like a rough example, right? Like, if there was a trade or a signing, I knew that was going to get out fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was just no getting ahead of that. Like, there's too many people after that same information. So if I happened to get it, like I was gonna just tweet it because at that point, the fact of the matter is once it's out there, then it's out there. That's it. Like you're on to the next thing, right? So there's no shelf life, in other words. Whereas if there was a project I'd been working on that had some news in it, right? Then that's different. At that point, like that's a different calculation. So a lot of times it was like, let me think. Oh, the day that Syndergaard and the plate of lunch.
Yes.
Like that was one where I knew that I had way more stuff on that than anybody else. I knew it. So it was like, okay, I can wait. Because even if someone says, oh, there was a thing, I knew I was the only one that had it chapter and verse. I saw the whole thing from start to finish, got every single person involved in it on the record before I left the clubhouse that day. And so I felt confident that I was the only one that had command of that story. So I didn't tweet it immediately. I waited to put that out there in that instance. So, but that all depends, right? Like it's just all very dependent on situation. Sometimes it is a roster move or whatever. There's no shelf life. You just got to go tweet it. That's what it is. But if you got something you've been working on for a while, it happens to have something in it of substance, then that's when I guess you bet on yourself to know that, hey, I think I have this and no one else does. But I think Harvey went MIA one day. Matt Harvey went MIA that one day.
Yeah. Was that a World Series practice? He was late, or was that a different instance?
No, this was Cinco de Mayo, the next day. And I remember like someone else had that first. So then the challenge becomes, all right, first you're pissed that you didn't have it first as a reporter, right? And then the second thing is like, all right, who's going to win the next day's story? And I remember telling myself that day, nobody's going to have a better version and more complete version of what happened than I will today. And that was my goal. And so, throughout the day, I'm like learning things. Am I going to tweet all that out?
No.
No. But then when it was time to publish, right? Time's up. Got to put a story together. Like I was proud because the first part of that story was the first time the players noticed that he wasn't around. And the end of the story was on the Sunday morning when he walked through the door at Citi Field, and waiting for him was Terry Collins, Jeff Wilpon, and Sandy Alderson, right? And I had it chapter and verse. So I'm not going to tweet that out as I'm getting it, right? I'm not going to do that. But that's the one you save for, all right, we're going to hook the readers up right now. There's going to be worth their weight. So that again, I'm just saying that to illustrate that there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's all depends on the situation.
Now, would you say it's different between, working on Newsday versus working with Athletic, which is behind a paywall when it comes to tweeting versus writing? Because you would think, or I would think from the outside looking in, because people are paying to read your articles, you would be more likely to want to write something as opposed to break it on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to write it first.
Right.
Like, I mean, that's just, if I didn't have to tweet something like news out, I wouldn't. But that's not the world we live in. So, but honestly, coming from Newsday to the Athletic, that part wasn't that all that much different, right? Like there's certain things you just have to do on Twitter. But there's a lot of things that you don't, right? There's a lot of things where, you mentioned we have a paywall. People still have to buy a Newsday,
Right.
right? Like there's people at the newsstand paying money, and it wasn't a lot, but you do it every day on the train, it's a lot, right? They're still paying money. We had home subscribers, they're paying money too. So from fundamentally didn't really change, right? Like they're paying money to read my articles in the Athletic, they were paying money to read them in Newsday too. I mean, not online, not until later. Then there was a paywall, but like, yeah, I don't think it fundamentally changed.
And how do you deal with pushback between the people, your editors who are higher up than you, the people who are really in charge of what's going on here? Because obviously they want to protect their babies, right? And they want the exclusive scoops on these sites. And obviously it's a balancing act between being able to get these stories and get them out there and raising your profile, at the same time having yourself aligned with the direction and the goals within the company. So how has somebody like you dealt with pushback when you've been put in situations like that?
I'm trying to think about pushback, Joe, and honestly, I don't know if I've gotten any, right? Like, I mean, I think one of the cool parts about being out in the field and being a beat writer is the autonomy. Like they're trusting you to be the eyes and ears in that room, right? Like I work for people. I have editors when I'm out there. They're not seeing what I'm seeing, and they're not hearing what I'm hearing. When you think about it, that's a lot of trust you're putting in that person that you got out in the field. That's a lot of trust the reader is putting into that person out in the field, right? That was something that I was aware of all the time. Like, you're nothing without credibility in this. Nothing. If you get a bunch of stories wrong and you tweet something, I think the worst thing as a reporter is to have people go, nah, you don't know if that's right or not. Like that, but vice versa, right? One of the best feelings is when you tweet something, you write something that, maybe people didn't know it or it was kind of controversial or whatever, and then people believe you, right? Like that's a great feeling because you've earned that. You've earned it by doing what you say you're going to do. You've earned it by when you're wrong, you admit it, right? You've earned it by when people criticize you, are you giving them the time back, right? Like, are you explaining what happened? Are you a credible voice? Like when you break a story, one of the scariest feelings in the world is breaking a story. There's that period where you're alone and you're going to be alone because you're first. And if you're wrong, oh man.
Yeah, you get hammered for it.
Oh,
now you do.
We saw it with Trevor Bauer. Somebody
Yeah.
West reported.
And that's the thing. Like, I'm, people on Twitter ask that kind of stuff all the time. How come you don't hammer the other reporters when they're wrong? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you for me, because I've been that guy. I've been wrong. It sucks, man. Like it sucks to have people piling on, especially when they're your peers. Okay, there might be competitors, but they're also like we're all in it, doing the same thing. So I'm not ever going to be that guy going, oh man, look, he was so wrong. Oh, he whiffed. Like, no, because like you're one story away from being that person. And what I remember, like when in those instances, like who's taking a free shot at you.
Definitely.
Okay? Yeah. Like, do you want to be that? So for me, like I'm never gonna do it. And by the way, it's hard. All right. Like nobody wants to be wrong. It's very competitive. It's very hard. And mistakes happen. So you own them when they happen. Like it's what it is. Right. So no, I mean you're good. The scariest thing is when you're about to hit that button. Dude, that is terrifying. Like, if you're wrong,
how many times are you proofreading before you hit send? I always get when I'm sending a tweet, I'm so nervous. I read like 18 times.
Like sometimes when it's big news, there's this feeling. Okay, so we're talking about Matt Harvey earlier, right? One of the first things I remember being on the Mets beat, relatively new there, when I'd caught wind that Harvey's at the hospital, okay, and they're looking at his arm. So this is when he had TJ, but like this is that day that it came out. And I got a text at noon. And like I had done enough digging. Now I'm at the point where it's like I can say it. Like he's being checked out for an arm injury, right? And that's a big freaking deal in 2013 or whatever that was, right? I stared at that thing so long, so long. And then I tweeted it. And I remember my phone battery was kind of low. Dude, it killed it. All the replies and whatever, like, it literally killed my phone, started malfunctioning because of all of the traction that it got. So it was a reminder of why it is that you better be right. And I remember there was like maybe a 7-minute period where you're the most lonely person on earth, right? Because now it's like, if I'm wrong, if I had somehow messed this up, I'm just trying to get established on this beat. I have like created 2 more years of work for myself to not be a clown. Think about that for a second. You make a mistake and you're paying a price, maybe for years. Okay. And it's like, oh man, like that's why I'm staring at this. And then of course the phone dies, which is even worse. Right. But it took me a while to realize that, like, you know, when people actually began, like other reporters were like confirming that report or finding out on their own. So I think Francesa said it on the air a few minutes later, because he'd like, you know, maybe the producer had seen it and they tracked it down, and somebody else. But like until that happens, like I can't even begin to describe the dread, fear, like you feel like you're gonna throw up. Like I felt like I was gonna throw up until I heard other people confirm it, even though I knew it was right. It doesn't even matter. You just know that you're alone. And it's
Right. Listen, you got to be right, and luckily you're at the right show, because our show is, I'm right, and Joe and I are always right. So hopefully one day we're right enough that we get the social presence like you, that our phones could die also. But I wanted to know, when did you decide that you wanted to pursue journalism as a career? How did you end up at the University of Nevada? And is it true that a lot of the scholarship basketball players at the University of Nevada actually think they're going to play basketball in Las Vegas, and then they get to Reno and they're like, what's going on?
Well, first of all, like what a terrible thing to say about Reno. Like that, what a horrible turn this has taken. Like
Oh,
Reno,
I heard this come out like 2 years ago when University of Nevada was like a top 10 team, and the basketball players would be interviewed, and they're like, oh, I didn't really know where it was. So I thought it was going to Las Vegas.
oh God, like you know, maybe that's true, but no, actually the program's been pretty good, man. We've had, you know, when I was there, like went to the Sweet 16 one year.
Good
Right?
basketball team.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good basketball team.
So like you know, probably high school is when I felt like this was interesting. Journalism was interesting. Um, and I actually thought I would be doing something else in journalism. You know, I thought I'd be like covering government or covering wars or whatever. Like, so some of my first jobs were like actually covering, you know, fires, crimes, going out to the scene of, like, you know, one of the first places I went to, actually on the scene, like I pull up and there's pieces of a motorcycle all over the road. And somebody had gotten high and driven that motorcycle like 90 miles an hour into the side of a truck, right? And you can imagine what that looks like. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this. It turned out maybe this isn't what's for me. And so I don't know. I've always liked baseball. I've always loved baseball. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I want to cover baseball, right? So that's how it kind of began. I went to junior college first, actually, like near home, and then went to Nevada because there were some people there that I had gotten to know, like, and they're like their professors, like friends of friends kind of thing, and like that had, you know, recommended it, and you know, I'm glad they did because I had an awesome experience there. A lot of great people. Like still some of my best friends are from that time period, right? So you know, and then that point it was like, you know, I really enjoyed it and got lucky. You know, I got like back then it was about getting internships in the summer, and I got really lucky because, you know, my internships were the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. Ooh. Which are like hard to get, and felt super fortunate. But I mean, at both those places, like I met great people and learned so much.
How did you turn your Nevada connections into internships on the East Coast?
Yeah,
you know, it doesn't seem to, I don't know, pass the sniff test at first, but I mean, those are really impressive right off the bat.
Probably straight up luck. I mean, what can I say? Like, I mean, especially the older I get, the more I realize some of the breaks we get, man, like you just have no idea. For all I know, they wanted to hire somebody else and they couldn't do it. They turned it down for something else. You know, like who knows? I have no clue. All I know is that, like, one of the people I met there was standing at the, standing with me the day I got married. Okay.
Wow.
One of my best friends. And also, by the way, a great sports writer. But like, that's the kind of thing that I couldn't explain that, Joe. Like, I don't know, man. Like, there's no, and like, let's put it this way: if you told me to relive those times 100 times, how many times do you think it would end up the way it ended up? Maybe one, maybe two. The point is, I wouldn't want to like walk it again, like, because I mean, geez, how many ways could that have gone sideways, right? So,
Right.
yeah, that's a long answer for. I guess I got lucky, which is fine. Sometimes that's what it's about. But I will say this: I'd like to think that I was ready for that luck. You know, like I'd like to think that when I got those breaks, like I proved to people that I belonged there. And in Washington, that's what happened. They hired me right after that internship. They freaking hired me out of school. So, like that's so yeah, maybe it was luck. Who knows? I'd like to think that the second part of that wasn't luck.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you leverage those internships right into covering the Orioles? Because you're only with the Orioles for a year, and you went right to the Yankees, and you mentioned before that you were with the Yankees for 3 years, and you kind of progressed from there. Uh, so so I'll reiterate, how did you leverage that, and who would you say through the course of the first 5 to 10 years of your career, the earlier years of your career where you were bouncing around, covering different beats in different places, having your work published in different publications. Who do you think were the most important people for you in your life at that time?
Well, okay, so that's a really tough one because there's too many to name. But I'll say two because the context of what we're talking about is like baseball, right? Like basically the question is how to end up covering baseball. So there's really two. One is Emilio Garcia Ruiz, who is now running the San Francisco Chronicle. At that point, he was a sports editor of the Washington Post. So he gave me a shot there. And, one of the first conversations we had, and this is something I do now with everyone I talk to about work, he's just like, straight up, what do you want to do? Like, what is your goal here? And I said, well, I want to cover Major League Baseball. That is my goal here. Like, okay, great. Let's see if we can make that happen. You're covering Maryland football, right? Like, and the point is like, that's what we got. You're gonna learn, and I understood that. So,
You use a little bit. Happens to everybody.
well, do you get what you get? So, but that same day, we had another editor at the paper. Her name was Tracy Hamilton, and Tracy was the baseball editor. She has me to lunch because she'd heard, I want to cover ball. So whatever, that was a nice lunch. She was great, like was super friendly the whole time. Well, now we flash forward a couple years, it's 2 years maybe, and Tracy calls. He's like, "You still want to cover baseball?" I'm like, "Hell yeah!" Well, great. Spring training in Lauderdale starts on X date. Be there. Like, what? What? Like, so I cover baseball because Tracy Hamilton is a good person who remembered. That's why. Like you asked me how did it work? It's because I got lucky and came across good people who remembered, right? Emilio remembered. So yeah, like that's what got me in it. And after that year, it was like, God, this is great. Like this is great. I like covering baseball a lot. It's really hard, but I want to get good at it, because it's really hard. So that's how it went.
How did you get the position then with the Star Ledger? And then from there, how was, obviously the first year there, you're covering a World Series team. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was nuts. The hardest thing to do, I think, as a sports writer is have your first year on a beat because everything's brand new. You don't have any friends usually. Like it's a tough thing. So I was the last Washington Post Orioles writer. Actually, they eliminated the spot, so now I was out of a job. Okay, but a job had opened up at the Ledger, and that editor had worked with Emilio. That's how a lot of this works, right? It's it was right place, right time. He calls out of the blue. It was like, we've got this gig here. Are you interested? Yeah, right. So I walk in and it's like, I'll never forget this, right? Like, so I got him from covering the Orioles in 2008, and shocker, they weren't very good, right? And I walk into the Yankee clubhouse, and here's Derek Jeter and Jorge Posada and Mark Teixeira and AJ Burnett and CC Sabathia, right? Like, and I'm
But A-Rod.
and A-Rod and
A-Rod.
no, right? Like, you're just like, like, this is Johnny Damon's on the team at that point. Like, I mean, it was just like, holy cow, right? Like, I'm looking at like the infield by itself. You're just like, oh my god, like that's brand new. And by the way, there's like 3 times more people in the room, right? Like, and they're people who know what they're doing. So it's like Joel Sherman's in there. You're just like, oh shit, like, what am I going to like, Joel's great. George King's in there. He's like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? Like, it's, and everywhere you looked, it was like, that's like, oh man, like, these guys are really good, So like, it was terrifying, right? And like, I don't know anything. It's like day 3, and I'm, you have to write notebooks in a newspaper, right? It's like a 400-word little wrap up, right? And it was like early in the morning. Like, it looked like it was going to be kind of a slow day. And I turned to Ken Davidoff, who was working at the time at Newsday. All right.
Yep.
Well, Kenny.
One of our Newsday connects.
That's right. But Kenny, it's kind of a slow news day. And he starts laughing. He's like, the Yankees always provide. That's what he says.
I'm picturing Ken saying that in his Christian Bale like voice right now.
Yeah. Laughing to himself. Oh, stupid kid. Right. So anyway, game's in Dunedin that day. We go. It's like, now it's 3:00 and it's still feeling like a slow news day. Players are starting to leave. And here's Angel Pressinall picking up A-Rod. Like, the Yankees always provide. There it is. There it was. No longer a slow news day. And that's pretty much it. You cover the Yankees, shit like that happens all the time. Like, you just never know. All you know is that it will happen. And then when it does, you need to be ready. And of course, I didn't even know it was Angel Pressinall till later. I'm like, oh no, whoops. Anyway, like, yeah, it's that's how I ended up there. And yeah, it was wild because they were good, a lot of names. And by the way, Alex had been suspended, or not suspended. He had come off a hip injury, right? Like, he didn't even play a game until May 5th, I think, in Baltimore. And they were giving out styrofoam syringes on the street, putting them into the ballpark. I'm just like, right. And to this day, the only time I ever heard more venom coming out of a crowd was NLCS 2015. No, NLDS 2015.
Chase Utley.
Yeah. So those were 1-2. It was Chase Utley in Flushing, which was like scary because I was thinking, like, if there were no police, people were going to come out of the stands and try to beat the crap out of him. They were so mad. And the second one was A-Rod in Baltimore because, God, they were all over him. And it was like, it wasn't even like good natured, man. Like, they like just detested him. And you felt it. When you get that, like, it's, especially now in a pandemic, we forget this. You get a lot of people in one place, you can feel what they're feeling, especially if it's all collectively the same thing. And in these 2 cases, it was like everyone in that ballpark hated A-Rod, and everyone at Citi Field wanted to see Chase Utley hurt. And you can feel it. And it's a crazy thing. I miss it, actually. It's a thing to miss because that is a cool part about going to the park, is that the fans and feeling what they're feeling. It's a really, really special thing. I miss it.
Looking back now, you know the guy for a while. Any surprise at all or any indicators that you could think of as to Robinson Cano being caught cheating twice?
That's a hard one. Like, because every time, like, the first thing I ever think of whenever people talk about Robbie Cano and that name comes up, he might be the most talented baseball player I've ever seen. Okay, just a straight up, like, when you go to the cover baseball, you're always at the park way earlier than everybody else, right? You're getting there when the players get there. So I remember going to the park in Tampa. So you're in the dome, everything's louder because you're inside. And the press box is like right on top of home plate there. It's awesome, actually. Everyone thinks it's a dump because it is, right? Like if you're a fan, like it's not your best favorite ballpark, but if you're media, it is actually one of the best ballparks in baseball because you're so close. There's a lot of great things about it. So one of them is I remember like Robbie would be out there for early work with Kevin Long, who's the hitting coach at the time, and they'd be doing drills. And so I would like find myself just getting lost watching him swing and hit the ball so hard off the bat. And then the seats were empty, obviously, and it would like be line drive after line drive against the plastic, and then it would boom because you're in a dome. It sounded like cannon shots, and he made it look so easy. Then you'd watch him do it in the game. So, I don't know, like, am I surprised from that level? Yeah, because I always looked at Robbie as like a guy who didn't need it, right? Like if there was someone who could have just gotten by on straight talent, it was him, because it was like this innate thing. He hit the sweet spot of the bat every single time, it felt like. I guess like the one thing I think is like he also played second base, right? Like that's a position, especially before the new rules, dude, you were getting hammered all the time. And I think about how many times you're trying to get out of the way back in the day because someone's trying to take you out on a slide. Especially if that ball's to the left side of the infield and you're turned around and your back is to the base runner, right? And look at, by the way, how many games Robbie missed in that time period. How many? Like he played $1.62 and like no one thought twice, right? Maybe so, I guess like in retrospect, like I guess you could be like, geez, maybe that helped, right? But like I remember just in real time, everything I thought about Robbie Cano was like, damn, he's talented. Like he's one of those people. He was put on earth to play this game. So it's a weird thing to now you say that name and he's a 2-time user,
Right.
Suspended guy, and it's like, what a shame. Because,
and Mark, I think he'll be off the Hall of Fame ballot after the first year. I think it'd be tough for people to justify a 2-time user, don't you think, to be voted? I think it'd be tough. Next year will be very telling, though, don't you think? We'd have A-Rod and Ortiz on the Hall of Fame ballot.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a tough one, and it's everybody's going to have to figure out their line, right? And like if we were going to talk about 2 times, getting caught twice, like I think that's a pretty reasonable line to draw. Like me personally, whenever I've looked at Hall of Fame, I draw a pretty big difference between some of the stuff that was going on in earlier eras compared to like, that period in time where there was a reckoning in the sport, right? Like I think we can all agree, people who watch this game know there was about that time period where like it was very clear, don't do this shit. Do not do this stuff. Don't. Okay. Like the league increased the penalties. They made a big deal of the penalties, right? Whenever someone got popped, it became like, they were using those people to set some kind of example.
Right. You covered the first ever player banned from the game for steroids, and Henry Mejia. What a knucklehead that guy was.
Dang, yeah. Well, I forgot all about that. Yeah. Isn't he back in pro ball now?
I think he was like signed by the Red Sox last year, but for the minors. But I don't know where he is at now.
Yeah. So like that's a complicated issue.
Yeah, Mark, I was going to follow up here because you've made appearances on the past. We mentioned your SNY appearances. You've been on MLB Network several times, and you've been on MLB Network explaining your Hall of Fame ballot, which I think is really, really important because I think the most important thing here for the baseball writers is the transparency of everything. And we mentioned before that we had Ken Davidoff on. So I asked him this. You kind of answered it a little bit already. There's a certain way to frame this question, and I like the philosophical approach because I think every writer is entitled to their own opinion on this. I think every writer is entitled to their own little formula that they do in their head to justify their Hall of Fame vote. But you in the past have voted for players like Barry Bonds, like Gary Sheffield, like Roger Clemens, like Sammy Sosa, right? All those players have certain ties. You don't know which players have been doing what. There's really no way to trace back those players. And Nick brought up, I think, an outstanding point. Next year is going to be, I think, the most important year we have in a really, really long time because it is the final year that I believe Bonds is on the ballot, right? I believe
Clemens.
Clemens too. And it's the first year that A-Rod and Ortiz are going to be on the ballot, right? And I think that if the writers vote in Ortiz and they do not vote in Bonds, Clemens, and A-Rod, and I think A-Rod, there's some justification there if you want to leave him off and you don't want to make him a first ballot guy. I totally respect that, coming from a Yankees fan perspective. But so your philosophy when you vote, and I think you also have to be consistent with this too, right? So you don't have to give away anything that you plan on doing next year, but what other questions go into your brain as you're looking at your ballot, you're seeing which players you're going to check off, which players you're not going to check off?
Yeah, I'll push back on one thing right there, Joe. Consistency. Who says? Who says you have to be consistent? According to whom? We change all the time as people. Things happen that change our opinions all the time. From year to year to year. You'd like to think you're changing from year to year to year, because if you're not, you're probably stagnating as a person. That's no good either. So I used to think that. It used to be a big thing to me that, like, once I made a call on someone, well, that was what it was. And I found that was a really hard thing to kind of stay with, to be honest. I felt like it was an easy way to turn off my brain. That once I said, well, that person's not, then I'd lock it in stone and that's it. Well, that I came to realize felt like a cop-out. Felt like an excuse. Felt like an excuse to not have to engage in the topic again. Well, I've already made my decision. And it got harder when I started to look at it again and think, you know what? Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this thing I felt very, very passionate about and felt like I had a justification for, maybe I do need to step back and look at it again. So this idea that there's a way that writers should vote, save it. Like, I don't want to hear it. That is actually quite annoying to me. Until you've done it, like, you have no idea what that's like. And I'm not saying that you don't know baseball, because of course you know baseball, right? Like, you two know baseball. Like, that's one of the things I love about baseball fans is that the people who are in it, man, there's no faking that. Like, this is something that you do. You're with your friends and you talk baseball. One of my best friends, on earth called me last week, and what was the first thing we talked about? Baseball, right? Like, is he just as qualified to vote for the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. Okay, so it's not about knowledge. It's not that. Okay, but there is something different about, like, when, there's only 400 people that get to go do it. 400. Mm-hmm. And most of them are journalists, so they understand transparency. You're going to get savaged for what you vote for. You know that. Okay. And, like, everyone nods when I say, oh yeah, I get it. I don't think you do. Okay. Because that's where it's like you see the people's passions come out. Right. And when people's passions come out, I think we stop thinking logically. And that's everybody, right? That's the writers too. And so we're trying to always, because it's baseball, trying to apply logic to these things, right? It's sort of this offshoot of the analytical revolution that everything has to, like, make sense. And what I find as I get older is that it's bullshit. Like, it's baseball. This shit doesn't make sense. Like, I'm sorry, but, like, if it did, why the fuck are we watching it?
Right.
If you could tell me what was going to happen tomorrow, why watch this shit? Why? So this idea of having this fixed version of history,
right?
Having, well, once you decide it this way, you've got to stay that way. It's arbitrary nonsense rooted in this idea of analytics and having that be the only way to consume the sport. So it's hard to even say that, because now it's like, oh, he hates numbers. That's bullshit too. You're not listening if you're saying that. Okay. Like, and you've never read me, by the way, if you're saying that. Okay. Like, I understand that the sport is driven that way. I understand why it's important. But, let's not conflate that with applying it to everything about our consumption of the sport, right? Like, two things can happen at once. I can say that numbers are important, analytics, and the objective measures of things when you're trying to evaluate players. Yes, that's extremely important. Every team uses it. I can also tell you that I'm sick of launch angle bullshit because it ruins baseball. Like both things can be true. And then I think you've heard of this offseason where Theo Epstein, is saying it straight up. Like aesthetically, the sport suffers. So like, okay, this is a Hall of Fame question. We'll dial it back, right? Why we're having these issues, I think, is this like false concept of having to be perfectly logical to put this game in a box. And we do it with the actual style of play. We do it in how it's covered. We do it in how we vote for the Hall of Fame. And I don't want to do that anymore.
Right. I mean, Mark, 10 years from now, maybe you thought about this already. We had Tim Kirkchin on. We asked him, how are you going to think back to the 2020 season where some players, their numbers just don't add up because they missed 100 games? Someone I think that might impact a lot is, it's not going to impact on Mike Trout, but maybe somebody like a Jacob deGrom who, he started later, but he's dominant. Maybe if he had a flea or something, but how is that going to impact your mindset when you're looking back on these guys and you're more progressive anyway, where it's like you're not looking like, oh, it has to have this X amount of numbers and strikeouts or home runs, but that's something that I think that's going to impact voting, just because people's numbers won't light up, and you have to say, oh, well, let me look back because they only played 25 games in 2020 because of coronavirus.
So here's where I think we were just talking about analytics, where it has been so big and positive for the game, is that you can see the numbers that just don't do the job when it comes to evaluating players, right? So I don't know, if you're nailing or you're taking points off of Jacob deGrom because of his win total, well, you don't know shit about baseball. Right? Sorry, like you, at this point, if you're hung up on wins and losses for pitchers, you're in denial. Like you honestly do not know shit about baseball. Now, fortunate thing is, when I look at the voters, most of them know stuff about baseball. Therefore, they're not sitting there counting wins and losses for a guy like Jacob deGrom when they knew that for all those years the Mets couldn't score any runs, right? Like, I think the general, this is going to sound bad, right? Because everyone on Twitter wants to line up and crush the writers. But believe it or not, and I think you guys in your lifetimes have probably seen this, the level of that kind of knowledge amongst the people that cover the sport has actually gone up.
Yeah.
Okay. It's had to. We were talking about social media earlier. I think that's one of the great things. Right. You couldn't get away with being, head in the sand. This is the way it's always been because social media was there. Right? It acted almost as this like corrective counterbalance. You couldn't sit there and just write a story that goes, well, he doesn't have enough wins to be valuable. You get shouted down. I think that was a good thing. Because back in the day, you'd write something ridiculous. And the only feedback you'd get would be a letter to the editor that you may or may not see. Right? Literally, or a voicemail on your phone. It wasn't public. Now you write something stupid, right? Like something that exposes your lack of knowledge of something you ought to know. How long does that take to get around the internet? Instant. You know what? That's good. That's good. It keeps writers accountable. Because you can't get away with that shit anymore, right? Like you can't just be like, oh, these nerds, they don't know anything, blah blah blah. Like you can just do that and no one bothered you.
I think it's going to be at least 20 years before we see another 300 game winner. So you got to just throw out wins right there. No one's going to get to that plateau ever again.
I don't think we're ever going to see another 300 game winner.
No, because what does that mean? All it means is that you threw a lot of innings and you pitched in a lot of games, right? Like that's, I hate to be one of those guys that because I don't think every stat is worthless, right? I don't think that at all. But I do think there are exceptions where it truly is worthless, and a win-loss total for a pitcher, the way the game is played in 2021, is worthless. That's like asking somebody, hey, what's your ERA on Sunday? What's it telling you? Right? Nothing. It tells you nothing. It's so random. So that's not every old school. You know what? People are gonna rip me for this. RBIs, I still pay attention to that. I'll tell you why. Because if you're racking up a high RBI total, that means the person running the team thinks you can hit.
Right.
That's why you're hitting third. Okay, so no, am I going to use that? Am I going to use RBIs to like determine if I'm handing out $25 million a year to X player? No. But if someone's got 100 RBIs every year, it tells me they're probably in a place where they're trusted enough to knock those runs in. Is that telling you something? Hell yeah, it is. It absolutely is telling you something, right? Like, so an average is the same way, right? There's a lot of luck with that. I get it, right? And there's a lot of ways to be valuable that aren't tied to average. We get it. But is a hit worth more than a walk? Yes. Like we see it with our eyeballs and we see it in the math. Yes. So is it valuable to have a guy gets a lot of hits? Yes. Like, so it's not worthless. But
Right.
do you pin your entire evaluation on a batting average? Not if you
Yeah.
want to keep your job.
Right. It's interesting stuff there, and we could probably go on and on about that. But I wanted to know for you personally, was it tough to go from the Yankees beat to the Mets beat and then back to the Yankees? And what was the transition like for you to go from Newsday to the Athletic? And ultimately, how did you get to your current role here? And was it tough to say goodbye to the daily grind of being on the beat?
Yes. So we'll start at the back. Yeah, of course it was. Like the job I have now is awesome in that, like think about the conversation we just had here, right? Like I get to have these conversations all the time with our writers.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has a question about building relationships, like it's cool to be able to be a resource there. Here's how I did it, right? Like let's talk about it. Maybe there's something that I did that you can take. Then every time I have one of those conversations, I'm learning something that I might be able to pass on, right? So, my current job is deputy managing editor for talent development. It's essentially like coaching our people to be better, and it's awesome. Like I am humbled by the trust they put in me to do that, right? Like I mean, I assume that they think I know what I'm doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting me in that spot, right? Like I mean, so but I will, I miss the day to day, right? Because I do love the sport. I think the stories are compelling because I do love the sport, right? So the good thing is I still get to write. It's not like I don't write at all anymore. I mean, it's not every day, obviously, but there are projects that I'm working on right now that I'm excited about, that I still get to put my name on, and I still get to do the reporting and the writing that I really enjoy. Bouncing back to the Yankees after being on the Mets. Actually, of all the times that I kind of, changed jobs, that was probably the easiest one because I'd still had these relationships in the Yankees organization, in their clubhouse. Like the coaches, a lot of them were still there. There were players that were there. Like one of the first people who walked me back was Brett Gardner. Like saw me walk through the door, he'd heard it was going to happen. Like they had a great chat. Like, like it's funny because Jack Curry saw this happening and talked about it on the broadcast, but Gardner was like introducing me to the players that I didn't know. And it was cool. Like, because guys don't have to do that.
Right.
It meant a lot to me because like like I'd clearly established some level of respect with this player that, I think commands a lot of respect in that room. So to have him do that was so helpful. Like it was just such a really awesome thing that he went out of his way to do. So going back there wasn't that hard, actually, because I'd built relationships and maintained them. Right, I was gone for 5 years, but like I didn't go 5 years between talking to Brian Cashman. Right, I didn't go 5 years between even talking to Brett Gardner,
Mm-hmm.
or some of the guys that CC Sabathia. Right, like I'd maintain some like ties with them. So it was a lot of fun going back because I felt like being on the Mets made me better. I was better prepared to jump in and tell good stories, and I was proud of that. Right, like I was back on the Yankees for just 1 year, and Lindsay Adler took over. She does a hell of a job. If you're not reading her, you ought to. She's great. But like my first year back, like Giancarlo Stanton did one like one-on-one interview that season. It was with us. It was with the Athletic. Aaron Judge had become what he was at that point. And I was able to tell this story about basically how the coaches were trying to tell him to do it one way, and he basically was like, nope, it's going to be this way, and has used some pretty colorful language to do it, which is like, when you look at his public image, you don't think that, but he had it in him. and had that story, right? Like, so I felt like coming back, it was fun to be able to like kind of get to that point faster, just because I was more experienced. And I'd like to think it helped establish the athletics presence there. That like we were brand new covering the team again, but it was someone who had covered the team. It was someone who had relationships. Um, and hopefully it differentiated the coverage enough, right? Like, I mean, we did a big thing about, how their analytics revolution unfolded there. Like, Harris and I had teamed up on a story like that. Well, coming back with the Yankees beat, and like, it generated a lot of interest. Like, we got a lot of people to sign up for the site just on that one story. So it felt good to make an impact coming back. But part of that was it was easier. It was much easier than the first time.
So did you ever feel like you were ever going to get into a place right now where you're doing, I guess, more content strategy stuff now that you're kind of overseeing stuff as opposed to just being a typical writer and going to places and events and meeting different players? Now you're, I guess, maybe not necessarily overseeing everybody, but you're doing, I guess, your part in making sure that you're leading the direction of the Athletic. Did you ever see yourself in that position 10 years ago? And are you enjoying it now? You must be enjoying it, right?
Yeah, like, so the answer is no, hell no. And no, never. Now, one thing that I've always enjoyed was helping people along, because I know that in my career, like, I had so many people that, out of just like goodness, right? Like, for no other reason than it was like they were nice, showed me the way, made me better, right? Like, I had competitors that were like, their job was to beat the hell out of me every day. Yet some of those people are the ones that taught me the most. Like, George King was one of those guys. Joel Sherman is one of those. Like, they didn't have to, but they saw that I wanted it too, that I would work at it, and so they must have seen something. So I learned, like, I owe those two guys in particular, right? Like, I owe them a lot. I owe them a lot, and we've never worked at the same place.
Right.
Right.
So anyway, like, I always tried to pay that forward, in other words, right? So like, at the Athletic, when they hired me, I was like one of the more experienced baseball writers, right? Because when they started, they were doing that, like hiring people with experience. Well, they were also hiring people that were just starting, right? And what I found was, like, I just enjoyed talking to them. Like, when I'd be driving home from Yankee Stadium to Jersey, where I live, and 4 out of 5 nights my phone would ring, and it would be one of our younger writers. This is the word was getting out. If something happened that you didn't know what to do, like, right, like, manager goes off on you, what do you do?
Better call Mark.
Call, just see what he said. Like, it got around, right? Like, and that was flattering. Is there, like, because it's happened probably to me, and it has many times, right? But like, I found I enjoyed those conversations so much that I kind of figured at some point, I might do something in relation to, essentially what I'm doing now. It's talent development, right? So I'm not like managing a staff. I'm basically just like being a resource for people, or that is now my job, right? Like, I mean, earlier today, I did a whole thing, with some of our hockey writers, right? I'm not going to teach them how to cover hockey, but like, we talked about building relationships with people that you cover. How do you do that in a way where you can still do your job? And if you have to write critically about them, you can, but they also know like what your role is, like, how do you build trust? Because that's so much of this is trust. And so it's really awesome and rewarding to know that that is like what I do, right? Like, and it's a very different um reward, right? Like, so at the Athletic, there are certain stories, if they do well, everyone notices them, right? They cross a certain benchmark. And as a writer, I got lucky. I got a bunch of those types of stories at our place, right? That the editors noticed, people loved him. That's why I got promoted. I went from Yankees to National, because I was able to write these types of stories that they like. But you know what? Like, I had a writer I was working with last week get one of those stories, and it felt better than when I did it myself. which is weird. I didn't expect that. Not better, just different, I guess. Because like, oh, I mean, of course it feels good when you're the person doing it, but it was different and in a good way. Like it was really rewarding. Like I know this person had put a lot of time and effort into this story, and they'd expressed to me that like some of the input that I had in it had made it better. And it sounds corny. It was like an awesome feeling. So it's a neat thing to be in a stage of my career where I'm feeling that I'm getting to have those interactions, but also we'll still be able to write, and we'll see where this goes. Like I like it, but I mean, I'm a writer too. Like I'm always gonna miss the day-to-day part of it, but hopefully figure out a way to still be a writer sometimes, because I don't think it'll ever be out of my system.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that the writers are looking to you for advice. Your email's been blowing up this whole interview, so we'll start getting you out of here with our we usually wrap with this. We always got to ask writers about their favorites. So just in general here, your favorite games you've covered or series, specific teams, press conferences. We always find that interesting. Coaches and players.
Oh my God. Let's go one by one. Ask them one by one.
All right. So one would be in just either games, teams, or if you're doing a postseason series. So they all kind of loop together there.
All right. So I'm going to say NLDS, Mets, Dodgers, because what DeGrom did in that series, especially the game 5, was like, my goodness, like that is probably the best game I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes, where somebody who was clearly gassed basically went out there and took it to a really good team just on sheer will. Like Jacob DeGrom was just like, you are not beating me today. You did it. And it's like you now that people say that kind of stuff all the time, right? Like, oh, he just went out there and did that. But when you cover baseball every day for what I do for like 11 years, 12 years, you realize that you don't really see it all that often. And he did it with his team, like in desperate need of him to pull them through. And it was like that to me was like there's 2 places where I think the legend of Jacob DeGrom took off. The All-Star game, right? When he struck out the side or whatever, like
10 pitches, yeah, almost.
But when it really took off to me was that series. Game 5, like the first game he threw, he just shoved, right? Like I think he struck out like 13, broke the record for Met record, right? Like I think he'd passed Doc Gooden for most strikeouts in the postseason game. Pretty good. Comes out in game 5 with nothing and wins him that game. So that whole series, Utley, like the back and forth, like it was tense, intense. Like, and I remember, Jake after that game at Dodger Stadium, like they'd done all their celebrating, and I've never seen somebody more tired. Like he was sitting in his chair in the clubhouse, he was spent, and I'm like, you all right? He's just like, I'm pretty tired. Like I'm really tired. And it's like, you should be. Like you could put the team on your back. Like it was remarkable. So that season was special. That series was special. I think that game 5.
Yeah. Him and Murphy, very special. I'm picturing now because you mentioned Ken Davidoff. Murphy's hitting home runs. You're just looking over to Ken. He's like, oh, another home run. What was that like in the press box? And Murphy's just hitting these home runs.
You know what? Like, that's a good question. I don't remember, because when you're writing on deadline on the West Coast, you're just so locked in. Like, I was just too busy trying to like get my story done on time. So like, I remember it being like, Conforto went deep in that game too.
Yes.
I just remember very early on thinking, oh man, this is gonna be a classic, because so DeGrom runs into trouble early, and now Syndergaard's throwing in the bullpen, and then Terry comes out and then leaves him in. So we're like, ooh, this is like inning 2, maybe 3rd inning, something like that. And you're just like, dang, this shit doesn't happen every day, right? Like this is a do or die game, and man just left him on the mound when you had a guy ready to go who could have given you several innings, right? So I think like from that point on, it was just like locked in, because you knew already. I knew, I was like, damn, this is gonna be like a big game. Whatever happens here, it's huge. Like, be ready for it. So what happened? I couldn't even tell you. I was too focused on What am I writing today?
Absolutely. All right. Now, most memorable press conferences. To me, I just remember one of the all-time greats was Terry Collins just exploding. We got a whole busload of them in Las Vegas that they could come call up. That was great. Obviously, Terry flipping out after the game about with the Wilmer Flores situation. But you covered the Orioles, you covered the Yankees. So many introductory press conferences. A-Rod getting suspended, but which press conference to you comes to mind as something that was very memorable?
So difficult because you cover the Mets, like you can answer that so many different ways. I think TC after Wilmer was like just classic Terry Collins, like raw, honest, right? Like I think covering Terry was great because you knew what you were gonna get, right? Like, and I think the fans that loved Terry, that's why. There was no pretense there. Like he was pissed and he showed it, right? Like, and he was frustrated and he showed it. It was real. Sandy after that was just like surreal. Sandy staying against the wall going, that trade did not occur. You're just like, wait, what? Right? Like I remember just being in that scrum going, like, what the hell just happened? Like, what the hell just happened? Like, what? So I would say, yeah, those two. Like Terry being raw and real, and then Sandy dropping that this trade did not occur, and you're just like all hell breaking loose around. It was crazy. So I'd say those.
All right, and the last one here, your go-to players and coaches or managers when you need to get a quote for a story.
That's a tough one because, so this sounds weird. I think quotes suck most of the time. Like when you really think about it, of all the quotes that get put in the paper or a website, most of them aren't very good. So it's hard for me to even answer it because I never went into an interview looking for quotes.
Well, let me rephrase it then. Is there someone you would go to help you get a story?
Well, I can't say that. Like, why don't I give you my social security number and my bank account number while I'm at it? Hang on, you want that? Let me get my wallet out and no, I can't be saying that stuff. Like, I mean, you understand why, right? Like your
sources.
These are people that there's a reason they talk to me because I'm not telling people on a podcast who I'm talking to, right? Like when it comes to that stuff, no, I respect both way too much. You know what I mean? Like, if you trust me, I'm not gonna be telling people where that stuff's coming from. All I can tell you is that there are folks who know what they're talking about and I trust them and they've never been wrong.
All right, let's pivot. Your favorite stadium you've ever been to?
Dodger Stadium. Yeah.
The history and the location.
It's beautiful. Yeah, all of that. Like it was built in 1962. All right. And it feels it in the best ways. And it's also a pain in the ass, right? Like it's
old. Oh yeah, I've heard traffic going in and out of that place is a nightmare. But
it's a pain in the ass.
Totally worth it.
But it's gorgeous, and I'm a West Coast person, so I'm going to be biased, even though I don't like LA particularly, but Dodger Stadium is my favorite one. Yeah.
All right, let's end on a high note here. Your go-to meal or snack in the press box.
Oh man, that's a good one too. You know what? This is where Citi Field for food is the best place in baseball. Not necessarily their cafeteria or whatever, but the best thing was being able to have all these choices, go out into the concourse, go get it, and come back to the press box. So I'm just gonna say Citi Field, and there's too many to pick from. Like all the concessions at Citi Field are incredible. It's elite how good they are. And good for the fans, right? That's good for them. Like they get legitimately great food at that ballpark, and I wish more ballparks were that good.
All I know is every single time one of my Mets friends have dragged me to Citi Field, there's always been a huge line on Shake Shack. So I've never been able to get Shake Shack there.
Yeah, well,
always.
That's the thing, right? So there is always a long line there, but you go next door, right? And Blue Smoke's
Blue Smoke's great.
Right. Pat LaFrida is 3 doors down. You just go on and on, right? Mama's is there. There was that what do you call it? Those rice balls they would have in the club level. You go up there, And, you know, unlike a lot of ballparks, the Citi Field, you can kind of get around the place, even at the club level, that let you at least pass through, right? Like a lot of times. So I don't know. I think that was something that they got right. All right. The ballpark's tremendous and the food's off the charts.
Were you in Philly with the Mets when they broke the all-time record for guest team eating cheesesteaks? I know they absolutely destroyed it. We discussed with Mike Puma. I believe the bullpen catcher ate so many cheesesteaks. Bartolo
Yeah.
Colon just dominated, and there was a small article on it. But just want to know if you remember that at all.
Yeah, I do remember that. It was Rack that did that, which is crazy when you see Rack but I guess yeah, no, I vaguely remember that. Yeah, because I feel like there was also the series where I don't know, teams hit 16 home runs in one game. Ridiculous like that. Or not home runs, but no, maybe they did 15. It was something crazy where I just remember this game's never going to end. You know, because every ball in the air went over the fence that night. It was the damnedest thing. So I want to say it was right about that time. So that's why it sticks out. Yeah. But of course, I don't know, the Mets seem to come alive in that park. I wonder if they should have just moved down there, full time, right? Because even when the Mets weren't good, they'd show up in Philly and all of a sudden these guys get hit. It was crazy. It was crazy.
We had an amazing time having you on. Thank you so much for doing this with us, Mark. Hopefully, if Nick and I are very fortunate one day and we're hosted by The Athletic, you can come on with us a little bit more, some talent direction, and give us some strategy and some advice and some insight, and you could help us out along the way. But again, we really, really enjoyed having you on. Thanks for doing this. We always give our guests here the last word. So if there's anything else that you would like to share, if there's anything else you would like to promote, go right ahead. The floor is yours. We really, really enjoyed having you on, and we want you back. So hopefully you stay in touch with us, and hopefully we'll find some time maybe later in the year. We can have you on as the season's going on. You can talk to us about stuff that's happening along the way. You don't have to give us your sources. You're a very good journalist. You're incredibly good at what you do. That's why you've been able to move up as quickly as you have. So if there's anything else you would like to share, go right ahead.
Subscribe to The Athletic. That's what I like to share. It's a good product. If you haven't done it already, give us a shot. Yeah, I hope you do, because it's, yeah, I'm totally reading an ad, right? But really and truly, I'm not sure there's another site that covers the sport of baseball better than ours. It's just Kenny Rosenthal is worth the price of admission by himself, and the fact that you've got all these other really talented writers and voices also working there. If you haven't done it yet, give it a shot. Especially leading up to opening day. I know they're cutting the price on it. Give it a look. You will not regret it. And thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. It was a fun chat, guys. Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our special guest, Mark, and my co-host, Joe, I am Nick, and this has been You Know I'm Right.